I'm Caitlin E, and welcome to the Lit Review. It's coming at you a little bit late, but today we are doing my March wrap-up. I didn't have any half wrap-ups in March because by the midpoint of March I had only read one book and it just didn't feel like I should attempt that. So you're getting a full wrap-up with stats and all the books I read in March. So this month was the lowest amount of books I've read so far this year, or this past month in March. And I read 6 books in March, and the pages, I only read 1,938 pages, which is the lowest amount that I've managed. Technically, I did listen to like 2 hours and 12 minutes of an audiobook, though I did not finish it. And the average rating for this month is 4.3 stars, which is super high. So even though it's a low amount of books for me personally, the things I read were just such high quality that I'm really excited about it. However, I also DNF'd a lot of things in March. I think all of 2020, I maybe DNF'd like 3 things. I DNF'd 3 books in March. It's a big turning point for me as a reader that I was able and comfortable to DNF so many things. None of the DNFs count towards any of the stats that I'm going to talk to you about because I DNF'd them pretty quickly. But I will go through all of them in my long form review and talk you through why they just didn't work for me. Audience. So we're pretty evenly split. I had 3 adult and 3 young adult books this month. No new adult. My 2 big genres were historical and romance. So historical crept up this month a little bit more than it has in the past. Format. I did kind of, like I said, I kind of listened to some audio, but I'm not really counting that, so no audio books, 1 ebook, and 5 physical books. Author ID, or how they choose to identify themselves with pronouns. I read 1 book with a male author identifying as he, him pronouns, and then the rest were all female or she, her identifying authors, so 5 in total. And then the racial identity of my authors is as follows. I had 1 Asian author, 2 Black authors, 2 white authors, and 1 Latinx author, which, you know, is a great improvement because I was telling you guys last month that I was not really happy with my level of diversity in that category in February. So I'm glad to see that even though I didn't read as many books in March, the diversity level is at a rate that I'd like to keep going with. So I also like to break down the main forms of representation I saw this month. I usually break it down by main characters and supporting characters. The biggest form of representation was a POC main character, and 3 of the 6 books that I read have POC main characters. This is the first time that I have had enough diversity to clock this category. So I had 2 main characters this month that focused on a different religion or had a different religious perspective. And then the other form of representation that I saw a lot of was in the supporting characters, and I had 4 out of 6 supporting characters that were people of color. I also like to give trigger warnings when possible, so I'll give you like the big umbrella for the whole month, and then as I go through the books I'll let you know when and where those trigger warnings are relevant. I will also leave that down below, as well as with timestamps for each individual review if you'd like to skip around. So I had 4 that really stood out to me this month. The first being racism, or racial-oriented violence. This would also include a lot of like slurs or other things, just like bad news bears. Lots of racism in the books this month. Number 2 was slavery. I have at least 1 book that talks about it in depth, and the nonfiction book also talks about it quite a lot. The third is actually internment. One of the books I read this month had to do with the Japanese internment camps that were present during World War II here in the United States. Number 4 is fetishizing a minor, so over-sexualizing or threatening or lusting after a underage person. But those are the trigger warnings that I experienced or would like to warn you about. The ratings. The ratings are pretty straightforward this month. Like I said, my average rating was super high. So I had 1 5-star, 2 4.5 stars, and then 3 4 stars, and then 3 DNFs, like I mentioned earlier. I'm very excited to tell you about everything that I read this month. Like I mentioned before, there will be time codes down below in case you'd like to skip around and pick which books you'd like to hear about. Before I get too far into this, I have a 2-box system down here at my feet. They're literally just moving boxes that I have stored books in, and one is my no box. So I like to tell you at the end of every review whether or not it's going to stay on my shelves, whether or not it's going and it's a heck no, and it goes in the no box, or into the maybe box where it's like, I'm not sure, I'm on the fence and I need to think about it before I put it back in my shelves or get it out. So I have those at my feet in case they are needed, but I'll let you know how that goes with each individual book. The first thing I read and finished in March was Always and Forever, Lara Jean by Jenny Han. This is me finishing a series. I did a whole video last year about how I just don't finish series, and like all of the YA and adult series that I'm like in the midst of and have never finished. I did it. I finished one. Just the one. But I gave this 4 stars, and I'm definitely keeping this. I have come to realize over the course of 2020 and now into 2021 how much I really like this series. It is so sugary sweet at times. Like there are parts of it that it's almost like, you know, you get a toothache because Lara Jean is so sweet. But it's just, there's something about it that's like really charming, and you feel connected with her, even at somebody in my age range who is not in high school. But you just, the way she talked about high school ending and like the nostalgia and mourning and like that feeling of being on the cusp of this big change in your life, particularly in this book, because this follows Lara Jean when she's like a senior and contemplating college and trying to make big decisions for her life. Like there's just something that really struck home for me about that. So I just felt for Lara Jean in a whole new way than I had throughout the rest of the series. 4 stars, keeping this. I actually really treasure this whole trilogy in a way that I had no idea that I treasured it. So yeah, it's just kind of special, and I'm gonna keep these. Next, I read my one ebook for the month, and that was White Rage by Carol Anderson. So I will leave the cover up here, but I checked that one out from the library, and man, am I glad I did. So reading nonfiction is really complicated. I think it's hard to rate that sort of thing, but I try to do it anyway because it's about like what I'm getting out or what I'm taking out of a nonfiction experience, as much as what the author is doing. And I think that's always true no matter what you're reading. But I think nonfiction can get like a little squirrely for folks because of like the factualness of it. But I did give this one a 5-star rating because wow. I sat there with my little like stylus and highlighted so many different parts as I was reading in my Kindle. This was really informative for me. It's really impacted how I look at the world and how I read other works of fiction or nonfiction. But if I had to distill it down in my best effort to do so, because I think Carol Anderson is a phenomenal writer from a nonfiction perspective, just really good at laying out the details, but also setting a scene and making sure the emotions are 100% present in experiences that she hasn't lived, but speaks to because of her own lived experience really, really beautifully. So it gave you a really good focus topic, something like desegregating schools in the United States. And it talked about a lot of the politics that went behind that movement and how many states or cities or even the whole government tried to resist the simple thing of desegregating schools and like the impact that had on communities then and the impact it's still having now. Because I think often in the American education system or like in the mythos that we create about our culture, we want to talk about things as if they're like, oh, that's the past, we're moved through it. But Anderson writes really evocatively about how this is still impacting us today and like why these issues are nowhere near the past. They are still omnipresent. And I thought that was really profound and very powerful for me as a reader. So highly recommend this. It was a very quick read in the sense that you could do it quickly. I did this over like almost 2 weeks because I just wanted to soak in and process and do my own work on the side. But I really recommend this as a piece of your nonfiction reading if you're interested in this topic. Library book, not keeping it, but I do have all my notes from it in my Kindle, so I'm like quasi keeping it. Then I got to the first of my DNFs, and that would be my library book, Never Always Sometimes by Alsaid. I still don't know how to say his name, I'm so sorry. But I got like 50 pages into this, and then decided it was not for me. So this is a contemporary YA situation. I won't try to overly speak to the summary of it since I only got like 50 pages in and then left. But the portion that I read was in only one person's perspective, and that is David. So we know going into it that David and Julia have been best friends since middle school, and that David is kind of in love with Julia. He makes that really, really clear really quickly. But Julia, who honestly, her characterization is very much like the manic pixie dream girl, where she's just kind of like eccentric and quirky and cute, and seems to be there to like drive the main character to realizations and action. That's usually what a manic pixie dream girl is in like film, but that is what Julia felt like to me in the 50 pages I read. She didn't seem like a whole person so much as she was like a thing to move David forward in his life. And that is part of why I DNF'd this. I just wasn't connected to the characters. David really got on my nerves in a lot of different ways, and I just didn't even if there was a perspective of Julia in here, I kind of didn't buy her character either. So I just DNF'd it. It's going back to the library. Very excited to not have this in my care anymore. But I had done Never Always Sometimes for my Litland, so I needed another YA book to kind of fill that spot. And so I did. I picked Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. And this was kindly sent to me by a subscriber back in January, so thank you so much, Erin. I loved it. This was such a good get. This is a 4.5 star rating for me, and I really think the only thing that kept it from being a 5-star is that there were moments that felt like a little slow at times. But one of the things that I really treasure about this book is its take on grief and loss of a loved one. I think you could definitely count that as a potential trigger warning or content warning, but I feel like it's so much a part of even the premise of this book that it's kind of baked in and built in, like you don't really need to be additionally warned about this. So the quick pitch for this book is that we have two young women, one in New York and one in the Dominican Republic, and they find out that their father was on a plane to the Dominican Republic where it tragically crashed and there were no survivors. So both of these young women have full and intensely unique lives that are specific to where they grew up and very different relationships with the man that they call father, not knowing that it's the same person for both of them. And so it's about their grief journeys as individuals, but also the discovery of each other and like how that grief starts to commingle once they realize that they're not as alone as they thought. It's really beautiful. Elizabeth Acevedo's poetic style, because this is told in verse, is really lovely. Like, I think there are some gorgeous lines and moments that just resonated with me, captured an image, captured a moment in time, which is what I think poetry is meant to do really beautifully. And this is my first Elizabeth Acevedo, and wow, is it good. Like, full stop, we'll be reading more of her work because wow. This is one of the books that I flagged as having like a little bit of sexualization of a minor, because one of our main characters, Camino, has to deal with this older guy who just won't leave her alone, is stalking her. It has been for a long time. Like her dad used to pay him off to leave Camino alone. So like it's really intense and uncomfortable, and there's scenes in here that are kind of harrowing in that way. So that's the biggest trigger warning I would offer, content warning that I would offer for this book. But I think it's a really beautiful book, and this is also one of the books that features a different religious perspective. And I just, honestly, I thought this book was fantastic, and I'm so grateful to have been able to read it this past month. Oh, I'm keeping this. Then I DNF'd another book, and I DNF'd this one as an ebook. So that was Gild by Raven Kennedy. And this one, as far as I know, was supposed to be kind of like a Fae Midas retelling with a sprinkling of kink. And I was intrigued. I love a good retelling, especially in these like romances or erotic romances. I did not get very far in that book before I DNF'd it because I've talked about this multiple times. I'm not intending to kink shame anybody. I'm just really clearly drawing a line of what doesn't work for me. So one of the things that just like flat out never works for me is humiliation or needing to abase yourself or kind of like make yourself small in order to be noticed by somebody or to like not be harmed by somebody. So that was heavily present in the first like 20 pages, 30 pages of that romance novel. And so I was just like, you know what? This could get better. I've liked some of Raven Kennedy's stuff in the past, but I'm good. I don't need it. I don't need to keep going down this road if I'm already uncomfortable. He has a lot of lovers that are referred to as saddles. And for me, that was like a big no. that wasn't working for me at all. And his most precious saddle is our female main character, who is gilded, like he made her gold. And he keeps her in a cage and will not touch her or let anybody else touch her. And it just, the level of discomfort I felt in that female main character's head and the way that she was seeing the world, just not worth it for me. However, I will say that I really, really loved Raven Kennedy's Signs of Cupidity series. So it's not that I will never return to Raven Kennedy, it's just that that particular series was not for me. So I returned it, and I no longer have to deal with it. It's great. But that did leave me craving a bit of a romance that I did enjoy, and so I picked up An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. Oh my gosh, this was so good! So Alyssa Cole is one of those really amazing writers that can just genre hop within romance really effectively, whether it's contemporary, historical, or whether she's doing her thing as like thriller, or she's even got like a sci-fi novella that I want to read. Like I'm very much a fan. This one got 4 stars from me. I'm definitely keeping this. This book is set during the Civil War. Our main female character, Elle, is a freed slave, but she goes back into the South to pose as a slave once more to gain information for the Loyal League. So she's kind of like a detective. And along the way on this specific mission, encounters this handsome man who is posing as a Confederate soldier named Malcolm. And he is a Pinkerton detective who is likewise trying to get information from those in the South to pass on to the North. And they butt heads a lot. I wouldn't call this like total enemies to lovers, but it's definitely distrust to lust, if that's a thing. You get both of their perspectives, and it's really, really well done. Alyssa Cole talks about how she was worried in writing something like this, that having an interracial romance would not feel authentic to her characters or to her, given what her female main character would have had to go through and survive. But she says that in kind of like her author's note. And honestly, Alyssa Cole did such a good job giving Elle as a character conflict and understanding. You understand as a reader where that conflict comes from, like why she doesn't trust Malcolm, why she doesn't trust any white person, why she doesn't even trust some of the people who are enslaved around her, because, you know, like just the way that slavery was such an insidious force in everybody's lives that it touched. Everybody's lives that it touched. And I feel like that's, again, content warning for racial violence and for slavery, because that's all over this book, since Elle is posing as a slave. The tension in here was real. The sexual tension in here was fantastic. I would say we're talking about like a 3.5 pepper on the pepper scale for me personally, maybe a 4, but dang was it good. The chemistry between them was really good, and I cannot wait to read more of the series. I just need to stop talking about it, because I could go on and on saying the same things over and over again, but it was just delightful. Really enjoyed this. It was emotionally, you know what, I will say, if you are the type of reader that really wants like emotions, and you want the emotional connection, the emotional angst, and the emotional journey in your romances, you need this. All right, and then I read The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. And I also gave this 4.5 stars. I'm keeping it. I am also insta-buying the rest of the series because, wow, I've been hearing so much good stuff about this book from so many of you, so many other booktubers. Wow. I loved it so much. I will say up front, in terms of content warnings, this does feature the sexualization of a minor in kind of a major way. Like, one of the supporting characters is a priest, and he has uncomfortable lusts and feelings for our main character, Vasilisa. Sometimes you're in his head while he's having the thoughts and feelings, and so it's very clear in the book that it's icky. Like, the book is not trying to justify him. He is very clearly the bad character, or one of the bad characters in the book. But I just want to call it out. I know I had a really good conversation with one of my dear friends, Clara from Clara Books It on Instagram, and that she said that the existence of that at all in the book was like a very intense turnoff for her. So I kind of want to call it out in case any of you have the same concerns. It is there. It is present. For me, it did not limit my enjoyment of the book because he's very clearly coded as a bad man. So I didn't feel like Katherine Arden was like justifying his existence. But that's just a portion of the story. The much larger story is set in this like Russian-inspired or Russian fantasy space. It's a country that's on the verge of kind of like a new world in a way. So, but where Vasilisa has grown up in the north, there's very much like little creatures and like spirits that only she really sees. And they have like protected hearth and home, and people used to leave like bowls of milk or things out to feed them. And it was just like very common in the folk culture. But as the kind of new century dawns, Christianity is taking root and really having a big impact on the culture overall. And so the priest that comes into play is just telling people like, what you're doing is a sin. You shouldn't be feeding these spirits. Those are devils. It turns the community against those like fae folk spirits that have been protecting them from something very dark and evil. So you get to follow Vasilisa as she grows up. You see her as like a very young girl and her kind of wild child ways. And I mean that not in like a rock and roll sense, but literally she is just a child of the forest in so many ways. And as she grows up and becomes more confident in her knowledge of the spirits in the world around her, she's even more sure that she's being herself is the best thing that she can be, which is really, I think, like a cool message from this book. So I can't wait to see what's next. I did give it a 4.5 star because I felt like the ending was a little rushed for me. We get to like this big culmination, which I will not say specific words about for spoiler reasons, but it just felt like it started and then was over very quickly, which I'm sure helps flow in like the larger overall 3-book arc, but for this individual book felt like a little strange at the end. So that's why it didn't get a 5-star for me, but cannot wait to continue the Winter trilogy. Keeping that, if that wasn't clear. Okay, and then I also needed to finish this as a rollover book, but Enchante by Gita Trelease. This beautiful, beautiful cover did not save it from a DNF. This is the one that I attempted to read on audiobook as well. I got about 2 hours into it, and to be frank, nothing was grabbing me. In terms of the actual like physical book, I got 12 chapters in, and there was nothing about this that was grabbing me. This was definitely a cover buy because it's stunning. Also, my copy says Enchante, but other copies have All That Glitters, and then Enchante is the series name. So it's kind of cool that I actually have this version that has the original title, but I wanted to love this. It's set just before the beginning of the French Revolution, and our main character Camille is one of those folks that is like starving, struggling to survive, like really feeling the oppression of the upper class on her life, and the only way she can get by to help her sister and her drunkard of a brother is to kind of like charm different objects to look like gold so that she can buy different things. But she's quickly running out of merchants who are willing to deal with her because of that issue. So like to the point where I got into it, she had not gotten to a state where she was infiltrating the court, but the synopsis suggests that that is where she's headed. I love stuff with like witchcraft or magic. I love the like royalty dynamic across different cultures. And this cover again is such a stunner. I wanted to love this, and I just didn't. So this got DNF'd for me at like the 11th hour. This was one of the last things I attempted to read, and it's not gonna work for me. This will be going ASAP, but I needed to have a historical read to make it work for Litland. So I started this new book and read it in a day. It was a reread for me, Last Days of Summer by Steve Kluger. So this is one that I read for the first time, I want to say in like middle school, maybe early high school, and it's an epistolary novel set in World War II. And so I've always wanted to reread it because I remember loving it and crying a lot. So this is the story of Joey Margulies, a young Jewish boy who recently moved to Brooklyn, who starts writing letters to Charlie Banks, the third baseman of the New York Giants. Joey starts writing to Charlie because he's getting beat up a lot at school, in large part because of the anti-Semitism he faces in his community. So he thinks that if he can just get somebody really famous like Charlie Banks to be his friend and like show up, that he'll stop getting beat up on the playground. He'll stop having to get into all these fights. He's like 11 or 12 years old when this happens. So you get a lot of that like racial or ethnic violence or racial or ethnic language throughout this in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable. This is also the book that has the content warning for the internment camps. Joey's best friend is Craig Nakamura, who is Japanese, and his family gets shipped out to California in the midst of the war. Joey goes to visit Craig at one point in this kind of like happy, heroic moment, but also you see the intensity and the trauma that exists within those camps. Like, it doesn't pull back from the reality of like the internment camps. It's a slightly sanitized version, and it's a small part of the book, but it's definitely there and worth calling out. This is a mixed media book. It's told all through letters, bills, telegrams, and it's really about Joey's budding friendship with Charlie, and also Joey's general coming-of-age story during World War II. There are parts of this that are just absolutely unbelievable. Like, there's no way that so much of the starting point of this book would ever actually happen, but it's so charming and funny and silly, and I did cry still, even reading it all these years later. So I don't think it's a perfect book. There's some things that I kind of wish Kluger had done differently in terms of his portrayals of Charlie and his use of some of that racial or ethnic language. My main complaint is that that sort of language may have been common in the time, but gosh, I wish our main character / hero of this hadn't used it. That would have been spiffy. So for me, it's a 4-star read. I will keep this. This is one of those books that has been with me for a long time, and the fact that I still like it as much as I do, I think is important. Again, I don't want to make this seem like it's a perfect book. It does have a lot of trigger content warnings, and there's some of it that's a little too romanticized for me, but it's also intended for a late middle school, early young adult audience, and it works in that way. So this was my replacement and the last book I read in March, and I just really love it. So these are all the books I read in March, these plus White Rage by Carol Anderson. I did DNF 3 books, which is kind of huge for me, but I'm very excited about the ones that I did get a chance to read. These are more or less all keepers, just really top tier reading for me in March, despite the fact that I kind of struggled through half of it. My Amazon wish list is open, so if you would like to see that down below, you can. I've linked that for the entirety of April, because we won Litland in April, and that is always good news. So that's when I opened up my wish list. I'm also a Page One affiliate, so all of my affiliate information will be down there throughout the rest of the months that I am an affiliate. So more just calling attention to there's also a bunch of really amazing links to stop AAPI hate, as well as support the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't often call those out verbally in videos, but they are always there in the box. Please peruse at your own interest and liking. But at the end of the day, thank you for spending time with me. I hope you've had a fantastic reading day. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of me or this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!